morning YouTube, thanks for tuning in today. It's going to be the first video of hopefully quite a few videos on how I care for orchids and carnivorous plants, or don't care for them. As we're going to see, there's been a few casualties recently. I moved into this property about 8 months ago. Unfortunately, a lot of my plants were left to sort of deal with it as best they could, and windowsills dotted around the property. It was relatively dry, hot, and we had a few casualties. We're going to see some of those a bit later on. So we eventually got around to building the greenhouse. It's doing its cloud forest thing at the moment, so we wouldn't be able to see anything if we go in there. I'm going to open the vents up and open the door in a minute and let some of the humidity out so we can see, and then we're going to go around and see my soldiers basically, because some of them have had an awful time. Everything's really perking up. The greenhouse has made a huge difference to the plants. There's lots of new root growth, lots of new top growth. Some of the carnivorous plants are doing really well in there. My nepenthes are doing really well. It's made a huge impact on my collection already. Some of the techniques I'm using are quite Swiss Family Robinson at the moment, so we're sort of like plugging along, making the best out of a bad situation. I've got a new humidity system by Miss King we're going to be unboxing together and also installing together as well. I bought the ultimate kit and imported that in from America, so just waiting for some cash flow issues to sort themselves out, so we've got some money again, and then we'll get on and do a video on that together. We're also going to be having a look at my cooling system. I've got a swamp cooler, a big old swamp cooler. I think it came from a hospital. We'll be having a look at that and how I've got that rigged up. That's on a thermostat as well, so we'll be having a look at that. So things are early days, but hopefully it's going to lead on to some more important and significant stuff. Okay, right, let's go out to the greenhouse and have a look. Okay, so this is an elite Belmont 12 by 8 feet, all handmade by the lovely people. I think they're up in Bolton in Lancashire. Let's go inside the greenhouse and have a look. Sorry if this is a bit shaky, I'm using GoPro-esque camera for this. If there are any major issues with the video quality, I'll might look at upgrading at some point and getting a systems camera. So these are the plants at the moment. This is what's growing in here. You can probably hear the awful drone of the swamp cooler at the back there. This thing's an absolute beast. They don't make these things anymore. I've had a look for parts online. I think they stopped making these in, I don't know, the 1990s. Although I got it from a seller on Gumtree for about £20, and that's hooked up to a thermostat, so that comes on at about 26 degrees centigrade and brings the temperature back down again. But more on that later. I'll do a separate video on that beast. So we can come around and have a look at some of my plants. We've got an Orchid over the back here. I think this thing's supposed to enjoy Vanda-like conditions, although I find it goes red really quickly. So it's kind of tucked away over at the corner here. We're going for a bit of a close-up so you can see some of the redness on the leaves. And that's just growing in sphagnum moss in one of these like net pots. It's quite a young plant. It's looking a bit speckly as well. So he lives over at the back over here in this corner. This Phalaenopsis up here, this has been plugging along for years, this has. I mounted it on some cork bark about 2-3 years ago. It's looking a little bit sad on the edges where it was in the house, but we've got a nice new growth here. Some of the roots are starting to perk up a little bit. This was looking lovely, then we moved house and now it looks a little sad. Everything's looking a little sad. I watched some other people's videos and they've got all these weird and wonderful, fantastic orchids in the prime of their growing lives, and mine are still looking so sad from the move. My little tiny Neo Lucia Porcella, got a nice new pseudo bulb just here, and some new growth coming out of it. That's been with us a long time. That's plugging through. Cirripetellum, Elizabeth and Buckleberry. Well, I think it's been put back into the Bulbophyllum genus recently, I think. This has been with me for a long time. This was going in the old greenhouse. There's some new growth coming out the back just here. Try to shake it around too much, that's quite heavy. These old teak baskets are hard to come by, but they're unbeatable and they're so solid and they seem to last really well. They hold a lot of the moisture in there. I've just lined the basket slightly with coir, the coconut fibre. You might be able to see that in the bottom there. Just to hold the media in, and that's just in normal potting, orchid potting compost bark or fine grade bark. And then I've planted some homegrown sphagnum moss in the top, which is starting to grow over it. That's quite happy. Likes it in the greenhouse, likes it in these conditions. Let's throw my pink Quicklias at the front here. These are Moctezuma cross gigantea, I think. Yep. And they were really sulking. I actually bought a small plastic greenhouse tent, had them in there underneath a little T5 light to keep them going over the winter. The flowers look pretty though, the wind's blowing everything around at the moment. But these things just flower and flower and flower. Pink Quicklia cross Tina. This thing's actually not, it's been in dormancy for a long time. It's just started to go back into active growth. But I'm hoping to get a nice pretty flower out of him at some point in the not too distant future. My Restreepia gratulata over the back here. We're going to do a repotting video on this guy. He's so pretty. I love the flowers on this guy. There's another flower over the back here which is finished. But it makes all these little plantlets, like here's one here, little plantlet with loads of little roots forming. If I turn it around, there's another one over the back here which is nearly ready to go, another one here, lots of nice little aerial roots on there. So we're going to do we're going to trim this guy up basically and repot him together. Bulbophyllum medusae. This thing came, it was only, how many leaves was it? I think it was this one, and this one. Since then it's done some, I don't know what these funny marks were on there. I just sort of knocked them off with my finger now. I thought they could have been scale at first. Just left a little bit of wounding on the leaf there. But we've got some nice new growth. There's a nice new nose coming out over the back here. That was the last leaf jump. You can see how miserable it was. That's probably only about 2 inches long. And we've got a nice new growth coming out of there. Some roots starting just at the bottom. That little nubbin will be where the roots start to emerge from. Bulbophyllum jersey. This thing has been a stalwart as well. It doesn't mind drying out once in a while. This thing is a nice new leaf growth there. Nice and fresh. Most amazing flowers on this plant. They are beautiful. They've got a hinged lip, which means that the flower sort of rocks and wobbles if you touch it. Some new growths down the bottom. That was the last leaf jump. You see how miserable it was. It's only the size of my thumb approximately. There's another new growth coming out next to it. The dark coloration you can see here was the result of a spider mite infestation. Basically, this is the fungus that results from their poo when they've finished feeding, and then you get like a fungal growth all over it. I cured that though. Neem oil, I can't recommend that stuff highly enough. I spray all of my plants once or twice, once a week maybe, with a relatively high concentration of neem oil, and that I haven't seen any aphids, I haven't seen any signs of spider mites, and nothing really seems to come anywhere near the plants. Collogyne fimbriata, very happy little plant. This was just an offshoot that was given to me by a fellow orchid grower. Lots of nice new root growth extension there. These are all new growths. That will turn into a flower at the end. There's a little bud there. One of the others, there's another bud forming in this one, but it's hanging in another one of these teak hanging baskets again that I've just lined with coir and sphagnum moss. They seem quite happy. Really retains a nice warm humidity or moisture retaining mix. Seems to do very well. I see we need to do some gardening over here on this Oncidium ornithorhynchum. Very pretty little plant, this one. Produces lots of little highly scented purple flowers They look like, I think they look like flying squirrels. And they're yeah, really pretty, lovely little plant. This is all the, believe it or not, this is what mammal damage looks like onto an orchid. And we've got the black marks, the staining left over from the spider mite infestation. Believe it or not, that was a rat that did that. Whether the plants were growing in the old conservatory, a rat chewed its way out of the sewers through the sewage pipe and was living in my conservatory for a couple of days until I eventually trapped and killed it. But its only food source during that time was my orchids, unfortunately, which is why everything's been eaten a little bit. Most of them survived unscathed. These are my two brassicas, which were once one brassia. I divided them last year, the spring of last year. They've come on really, really well. They're really happy. Lots of new growth in here. Lovely, fresh-looking root tips. Sorry for that brief, if not unwanted interruption. That was my son. He loves it in here. I've given him some Alice and some Cape Sundews, and he loves coming in here and seeing how his plants are getting on. I've just turned the evaporative cooler off because it's so noisy right now. Ah, much better. I can hear myself think. So back over there, this is the brassia I divided. Seems to be quite happy. We've still got some of the leftover leaf deformation, staining from where I had the spider mite infestation. Like I said, neem oil. I'll be doing a video on the dilution or the mix I use. It seems to work wonders. You can see some water damage or lack of here on the brassia. This was the original plant that I took. Then this over here was the division I took off. You can see this is a prime example of lack of moisture from where it was in the house. We've got these horrible crinkled leaves that look really unsightly. There is a nice new growth on one of these, which is a couple more new growths. There's one down here, which is looking okay, and one here. So eventually, over time, as these growths die out, I'll be able to trim them off, and we'll have a slightly more aesthetically pleasing plant. Right, the jewel in the crowd at the moment is my Dendrobium spectabile. This thing is amazing. I love this plant. It loves lots of light, so it sits here at the warmest and brightest part of the greenhouse. There's some nice new growths coming up on my finger here. This one kind of started growing and then stalled, as we've got this sort of like this dwarf pseudo bulb that sits down here in the crown, which is not really doing anything. But I've got a lot of hope for this one here. It creates these great big long canes. You can see next to my hand, this plant's pretty tall. And it's in flower at the moment, and the smell from this plant is amazing. It smells incredible. Let's go up here, stop it from wobbling around, and we'll have a look at some of these amazing flowers. So here are these alien-like looking plant, well, these alien-looking flowers. This unusual lip, this unusual hinged lip. I don't know if you can see that. Obviously, when a pollinating insect lands on it and lands, this whole lip hinges forward, away from the anthers, which are all nestled inside there. You can see those green areas. Those are the anthers in there. But they look like a flower from another planet. Really unusual looking, and the smell is rich, sweet, beautiful, lovely plant, absolutely lovely plant. And that really likes it in here. It loves high humidity, lots of water, lots of sunlight. Has this lovely grassy green sort of colour to the foliage. There's some new flower spikes coming out. They emerge from these little nubbins here. Don't know if you can see that against my finger. This little green nubbin I'm just touching there is where the new flower spikes emerge. There's a couple of new flower spikes starting on it. There's another one over on this cane here, right by my finger. So that will turn into another rachis and carry flowers. You can see the nectar dripping off of these as well. They're so sweet. These big drops of nectar. So I've got to be careful with mould in here. I've got quite a few fans in here blowing air around. Plus the evaporative cooler is very powerful. It really throws the air around inside here, keeps the air circulating. Dendrobium speciosum. This is another plant I bought from Burnham Nurseries a long time ago. This thing's been with us for quite a while. I haven't yet got it to flower yet. I figure that I need to probably start restricting water a bit more over winter, let it dry out a bit and see if we can prompt it into doing a bit of flowering for me. It's supposed to have some incredible flower spikes with hundreds of little creamy yellow flowers on that smell extremely strongly. It's a really beautiful plant, but like I said, I've never managed to get it to flower for me. And he likes lots of sunlight, so he sits up here over at the end as well. Because the evening sun comes through this side of the greenhouse here. I've got some shade cloth on at the moment, but this little area here I haven't put any shade cloth on, so it gets the most amount of light. Over here is Bulbophyllum ambrosia. I'm growing these in these little dishes, so these little clear saucers. There's a bit of excess water up here that needs dripping out. I just drill some holes in the bottom underneath there, put the potting media in. This is vermiculite, fine grade orchid bark, and there's a little bit of sphagnum moss which is all starting to grow along here and take off. I think this thing's actually a lithophyte. It grows on like spring seeps on rocky outcrops and stuff in the rainforest. But lots of new growth, lots of new roots. I'm hoping to get some flowers off of this. Slug damage, look at that, those dastardly slugs. Over here to one of my trays in the Nepenthes. Some of these came from CZ Plants, others came from Dr. Vistuba in Germany. Quite a few dead pitches on here need to be trimmed off. This is Nepenthes Tobica. Got sort of a slightly larger trap on here, but they're starting to really take off. Lots of new growth is extending out of them. Nepenthes gracilis. This thing's I just can't work out the growing conditions for this. It's either too hot, it's either too bright, it's not bright enough. So we're still working on that, guys. Looking a little miserable at the moment, but lots of new growth. We've also got a basil shoot coming out down the bottom here as well with new little pitchers. So hopefully he'll sort himself out. These two over the back here are Nepenthes lowii. These came from Dr. Vistuba's, tiny little plants, and they're really slow growing. I've got a new picture on this one here, this little red nubbin on the end here. But yeah, they're very slow growing. I'm sort of hoping they're going to pick up at some point. We've got some new growth starting on them. I'm hoping for some more substantial leaf jumps this time round. Over here's Nepenthes jacquelinii. This one came from, I can't remember where I got this one from, but lots of nice new growth. These tendrils are starting to become trap making size. There's another little tiny trap down here which is just popped. Little tiny jacquelinii trap. They've got those amazing bright red flared peristomes on them. And he's just opened. Nepenthes aristolochoides over here. This came in as a tiny little plant. Lots of new growth though. Lots of potential traps about to open. It's even got a tiny miniature aristolochoides trap there. It's not going to focus in on that, is it, on my thumb? Bulbophyllum fascinator. Once again, I'm growing it in that tray method again with one of these clear saucers. All the sphagnum moss is up and growing quite happily in there. I must be doing it right. If you can grow sphagnum moss, you're doing something right. So yeah, a few new growths on this. This fella here's popped out. I'm hoping that's going to take off. It looks very similar to my other Bulbophyllum, which is over this side, but it doesn't seem to be quite as virulent a grower. Cymbidium tracheanum. This was the first orchid I ever bought about 9 years ago, and he sits over here in a quite shady, warm spot of the greenhouse. Never managed to get into flower. He's a species orchid, so he seems to be a little bit slower than some of the hybrids. But a pretty plant. I just hope one day it'll flower. I'm really looking forward to that. My mother's Nobile orchid, or Nobile orchid, over here. It's gone a bit leggy. It was in the house. It's being starved of water, so it's been rescued. I'm going to be spending a bit of time. The cane's starting to rehydrate now. This thing was like a bit firm and crispy when I first got her in here, but she's starting to look a lot happier. There's a new side shoot over here. Just trying to train it upwards rather than out. It should really be hanging. It should really be hanging like this really, so the canes can droop nicely. but without any way of fixing it to the roof properly at the moment, I'm loath to do so. This is a very interesting plant over the back here. This is Musella laciocarpus, the golden lotus banana. I think that's right. You guys might want to Google that to find out. But it's basically like a dwarf banana species, and it produces these huge yellow lotus-shaped flowers that can last over 200 days. So that'll permanently be living in the greenhouse. Although I have heard of some people planting them out in the garden, they seem to do quite well. This is Tetrapanax papifera. Probably murdered that. This is a big tropical plant. These leaves can get over like a metre wide, really sculptural. That's supposed to be hardy as well, so that'll be going out in the garden at some point. And probably not this year, next year maybe. And then we move over onto some of my carnivorous plants. We've got Drosera binata var multi-feeder extrema. It creates these amazing pendulous tentacles on these stems that droop down. There's a flower spike coming out of the top. I've not had much luck with getting any seeds off of these. I suppose it's probably best to propagate through division, but he sits over the side here and keeps any fungus, gnats, and controls general insects in the garden, in the greenhouse. He's going to have to go up into a hanging basket at some point. Needs a good trim up. Here's my sons Alice and Cape Sundews doing really well over here at the next to the window. It's probably a bit dark in here for them. I should stick them out in the garden at some point and let them get a bit more sunlight. Drosera binata var dichotoma giant. This thing really is a beast. These great big forked leaves. Most of them are quad shaped, so you get four. It's all sort of glued together as one great big tentacly mass at the moment. But he was getting a bit cramped. I've got a terrarium at work where I grow cephalotus. There's even an Nepenthes in there. Some other Western Australian carnivorous plants. We'll do another video on those another day. I've got some Darlingtonia seedlings in here. I've got to get in here and separate all of this out at some point before these guys become impossible. Drosera prolifera is an offshoot from one of the stolons, one of the little branching flower spikes that rooted in the pot of the parent plant. I cut him off and I potted him up in here. There's a mixture of peat, perlite, and then a really thick layer of sphagnum moss on top. And he's nice and dewy this morning. I can see some new growth on there. He looks quite happy over there. Drosera adelae over the back here. Let's pick him up. The lance leaf sundew, Drosera adelae. Let's pop him over here where we can have a look at him. He's very dewy. These tropical sundews are love here in the greenhouse. And lots of little plantlets have shot up from the roots over here. We'll do a video on repotting this guy, and we'll take a lot of those plantlets out to make a bit more space for the parent plant. There's a nice new leaf coming up here. I can see he's going to try and flower again in the middle as well. That's a great plant, one of my first sundews, and pretty much indestructible. I took some root cuttings off this guy as well. They're over in a pot. I was just turning around the right way where he was. So sticky. There we go. So he sits over there. I took some root cuttings off. They're over here in this tray. And they haven't done anything just yet. These are sort of poking out the bottom of the pot. So I trimmed them off when I bought the plant in here, and I've put them in my garden of sphagnum moss, and they're growing away in there. I don't want that little weed is getting out of there. So hopefully we'll get some plantlets off of that as well. We can pop those up and sell them on or give them away. So my other tray of Nepenthes over here. Nepenthes fusca with these bright red sort of leaves. Starting to get some really cool little traps on them. Little hairy traps. Nice big leaf jump since we've been in here. Looking like much happier. There's another another trap over this side, sort of tucked out the way. Another Nepenthes fusca. These guys turn red really quickly. They haven't really been getting much more light than any of the other plants in here. they've taken this really bright red colour on. So I moved them, I backed them off from the light a little bit, moved them over the other side of the greenhouse, and they seem to have like plumped up a little bit, and they seem a bit happier. The Nepenthes Rafflesiana over here, starting to get some cute little fat traps on them, really bulbous looking, little tiny purple speckles on the front of them. Nice big new growth on here, they really like the heat. My other Rafflesianas in here, not as big as the other one, doesn't seem to be doing quite as well. My other Tobica over here, doing quite well. I think they got hot, and this is what caused this damage to the traps here. It's like the water became, or the fluid inside became superheated, and it's almost as if it burnt the edge of the traps. But they're plugging along fine. There's a nice new leaf there, a new trap burying itself down in the sphagnum moss. I think it's going to be fine. Back over to the Carnivorous Plants. Have a quick look around the greenhouse again. It's getting really hot in here. It is. Don't know if you guys can see that. 27 degrees centigrade and 27.8 and 91% relative humidity. It is warm and sticky. Should we go up and have a look at what's going on the roof before I turn the swamp cooler back on? We've got Dendrobium devonianum growing up here with these big long canes that come all the way down here. They're about 1.5 meters, the last one. I always walk into it, get stuck in my hair. But the new growth's nice and happy, shooting out along there. This was too bright again, so the leaves were being charred basically by the intense sunlight. Over the other side we've got Dendrobium Victoria Regina, doing really well. Nice new growth up here. Let's get him down so we can have a look. Let's have a look at the flowers first. This guy's constantly in flower. He's a very pretty little orchid. These beautiful purple leaves, they're sort of coming to the end of their beautiful purple flower, should I say. They're sort of coming to the end of their life now. Let's lift him up and we'll have a look at this new growth. So I grow him up on these at an angle in pots. You get a much more natural looking orchid the way they grow. The new growth looks really healthy and really happy. And he just hangs up here at the moment. I'm going to get some proper tying hooks so we can start suspending these orchids a bit better. He sits up there. Collagine cristata. I can only just read. This greenhouse is pretty tall. It's about, I don't know, it's got to be 3 meters in the middle. Let's pop him down over here. Another orchid I've had for a long time. Bit of a cool grower, although I suppose it can be grown intermediate. I'm growing it intermediate. Lots of new growth. There's a nice new growth here. New growth by my finger in there. A new growth just here. A new growth starting to unfurl its leaf just here. And he sits right up high next to a vent. So when the vents are open, or the roof vents are open, he gets a bit of cooling, for cooler conditions to the rest of the greenhouse. So he just hangs up here on that S hook, and that's where he sits. And over here, I can't remember what this orchid is. If any of you guys know, please tell me. I think it's a Stanipea, but she is miserable. This thing hasn't been happy for a long time. I've been growing it in some awful growing conditions, and I'm waiting for some new growth to emerge from it and it to sort of take off. I think I'm growing it in Stanipea conditions, so I'm keeping it nice and bright, and hopefully it will pick up and become a lot happier. Thanks again for tuning in and spending some time with me. Like I said, this is the first video for the channel. Things are a bit Swiss Family Robinson in here. We're sort of doing and mending at the moment. We've got that new Mist King system we're going to be putting in. We're going to be unboxing that together and also putting it in, hopefully doing a whole install video on that. And that's going to make life a lot easier with maintaining humidity in here. The next video we're going to be having a look at the cooling system and the humidity system I'm currently using. System's probably a bit rich. It's not really a system so much as that'll do what we need it to do at the moment. I'm hoping to get some automatic vent openers in here as well, rather than relying on panicked phone calls to my wife on hot days to quickly come in and open the roof vents up, or the louvre vent. I mean, that's pretty much open all the time anyway. So if you like this video, please subscribe. I'm going to be opening a Patreon channel as well, where hopefully you guys, in the kindness of your heart, will want to donate some money or help support this project. Any of the money earned from that will be going straight back into the greenhouse for plants or maintaining the system or buying new pieces of kit. And hopefully this will become a regular thing depending on the reception of these videos. We might start looking at, might invest in a system camera so you guys get better quality of video. I can work on my presentation, so you're hopefully getting a little better input or output from me. And we can go through the learning process together. So tune in next week and hopefully we'll have another video ready for you. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.